Hi, second graders. Today we are going to talk about genre. Genre is the type of books that you are reading. So the book that you read yesterday with Mrs. Marino, Little Flap Learns to Fly, was a fantasy story. That was the genre of the book. The type of book was fantasy. And today we are going to talk about the two elements that make a story a fantasy story. Little Flap Learns to Fly is a fantasy story. Fantasy stories are made up, so it is not a real story, it is made up. And number two, it has imaginary characters that could not be real. Okay? It is made up and has imaginary characters that could not be real. Those are the two elements a story must have to be considered a fantasy story. So we are going to look at our story, Little Flap Learns to Fly, and see if we can find the examples of how we know it is a fantasy. I'm looking at page 23 in our Wonders book, and I see that the characters are actually birds. Birds named Little Flap, Fluff, and Tuff. So I know that they are made up characters. They are imaginary characters. They could not be real. Okay? That's the first element. The second example of how I know that this must be fantasy is I can use the pictures. So also on page 23, I'm looking at the pictures of the birds in the tree, and I'm noticing that they have little polka dot outfits on. And I know that birds don't really wear clothes, and they don't wear polka dot outfits. So it is the birds in real life do not wear real clothing. This must be fantasy. The characters are made up. It's a made up story, and the characters could not be real. Okay, those are our two examples. The story is made up, and the characters could not be real. Now we are going to work in our Your Turn practice book on page 7, keeping in mind the two elements of a fantasy story. Okay, I'm going to read a short story out loud to you. It is on page 7 in your Turn practice book, so you can follow along now if you open up your book to page 7. It reads, "Thanks, friend. Planting a garden is hard work," says Mouse. "It takes me a long time to dig each hole." "I can help," says Mole. Mole digs the holes quickly. Mouse plants the seeds. Now you're going to answer the questions about the text. Number 1, how do you know this text is fantasy? Are two elements of a fantasy story. The story is made up, and the characters could not be real. Okay? So I think this is a made up story, and those characters couldn't be real because mice and moles, do they normally wear clothes and plant seeds? I think it might be made up. It could not happen in real life. Number 2, why is it easy for Mole to dig the holes? Well, I'm going to look back at the picture, and I think that Mole is holding something that helps him dig the holes faster. I wonder if you can see what it is. And number 3, why does Mole dig so many holes? Who remembers why are they digging holes in the first place? You can always go back and reread the story. So finishing up the Your Turn practice book on page 7, all about fantasy stories and the genre of fantasy. All right, have a great time working on it, second graders.